Okay, I guess it's time. So let's start. This is the MANET Working Group interim virtual meeting. There were a few more people who responded to the doodle for determining the dates that I don't see yet. But on the other end, we have Karsten and Michael in the audience, which is always good. Welcome. This interim was basically scheduled because during IETF-117 we sort of overran the hour that we had, and with the discussion on work items for a new charter still left on the agenda. And so, as suggested by Alvaro, who was in the audience at the time, we have organized this interim meeting, and hopefully we can at least start some discussion here, which of course will have to be continued on the mailing list, but I'll get to that. First of all, this is a virtual interim meeting, but it's still an IETF meeting, so I think we're governed by the note well. I think that all the seasoned IETF participants in the audience are aware of its content. Then there's the note really well. Be polite and constructive. If you feel mistreated in any way, you can turn to the ombudspersons and they will take appropriate action. Resources for this session are listed here, but you have found the session, so I think that's a bit redundant at this stage. The note well is done. We have an agenda with only a few items because the emphasis is on discussing new work items, or work items for a new charter, I should say. If there's any time left and anybody has something interesting, urgent, or otherwise relevant, we can add that at the end. We have an hour and a half, but it isn't a big problem if we end somewhat early. Does anybody want to change the agenda? I see no one in the queue, so maybe not. Donald Eastlake has prepared a presentation that will go into how Babel is supposed to be assimilated. It's his choice of words into of by the MANET working group, and therefore I would like to give the floor to Donald, because it will also set the stage for some of the later discussions. I will share his slide deck. Donald, do you want me to advance the slides? I don't hear you.
I muted myself briefly there. You can hear me, I hope.
Yes, now I can.
Okay, sure. I was just saying you can advance the slides. It's easier. So actually, maybe the name of the presentation and the YouTube thing I linked here aren't completely conformant to the harassment policy. But anyway, leaving that aside, we'll move along here. I'm on a loose break with Future Way Technologies. Next slide. So I think I presented on Babel at the last IETF meeting, but just to go over briefly here, it's a distance vector algorithm, also known as distributed Bellman-Ford. It's essentially similar to RIB, but it does have additional mechanisms. These avoid loops, so you don't have the count to infinity or count to some finite number you've picked out of thin air. And of course, the loop avoidance mechanism under certain circumstances could lead to there being no roots. There's a starvation avoidance mechanism. So as long as you got a root, you should be able to get to it. So it also reacts faster to topology changes and things like that. It's been shown to be very effective at networks that have mixtures of low and high quality links, such as wireless or hybrid wireless wired networks. Has done well in the battle mesh competitions in Europe and so forth. There are multiple open source implementations, and is a little old, but there's a much more in-depth technical discussion there of how the Babel routing protocol works. Next slide. So the Babel working group has cranked out RFCs. There were an earlier set of experimental RFCs. They've been replaced by these. The boldface entries here are all standards, proposed standards. And the key one is 8966, is the Babel routing protocol. The next two, 67 and 68, are security. MAC just provides authentication and integrity. And the 868 provides encryption also using datagram TLS. And it has been extended from that. There is source-specific routing, and there's a somewhat interesting RFC 9229, the last one there. You can route using IPv4 traffic through a Babel network, even though the routers and the packets between the routers all have just IPv6 addresses. So there have been proposals for other things, but the Babel working group has been very careful to really only do technical development in areas where there was demonstrated demand, say people really want to use it. For example, there is a draft that was never adopted by the working group on having type of service specific routing. So you might have different routing for different types of service. And that was didn't seem to be enough demonstrated need for that. That wasn't adopted or progressed. On the other hand, source-specific routing, 9079, was adopted and progressed and is used and is in fact was required by HomeNet, and Babel is in fact the mandatory to implement routing protocol for HomeNet. Next slide, please. So there are 3 drafts in the working group. Well, they have working group names. There are 3 drafts that haven't made it RFC yet, shall we say. One of them is the Yang model, which has been hung up for quite a while on a misref. It's basically, I believe it's a security-related Yang component, whatever, that many drafts are held up on. So that's really all been through the process and through the ISG and everything. And as soon as this other Yang draft gets out of the way, it'll progress. There's the Babel Mac Relax. The first one there is in Auth 48 for a bit. I need to ping the author on that. That is because under certain circumstances, you have unicast and multicast frames reordered. This can happen inside an 802.11 Wi-Fi chipset, so that you really have no software control over it. And basically Babel under some circumstances uses sequence numbering, and therefore you need to maintain separate counters for unicast and multicast, or in some other way account for that without getting false indications of drops when the problem is not the drop, it is the reordering. So that's all through the process, and it's about will pop out as an RFC shortly after the final RFC editor things are resolved. And the last one there is currently in AD review, is the round trip time extension. It turns out that there's a way to calculate a metric for links, how good that link is, based on the delay, round trip delay. And you, of course, immediately say, well, but that'll lead to feedback and oscillation and so on and so forth. But in fact, methods to deal with that problem have been found. And this particular metric is widely used in the field very successfully. So, and this draft explains that, and hopefully that will progress. There are, other than those, there are no Babel working group drafts. So all the working group drafts that exist that haven't been published are the 3 listed on this page, and they're all in process as shown. So it seems like a good time. And so the idea is when particularly the last one progresses a bit further, I assume, then the Babel working group will be shut down, and the idea is to transfer maintenance work to the MANET working group. Next slide, please. So what things are in the Babel charter that the Babel hasn't done? The only not completed item described in the charter was multicast, and this is the charter language, or extract from the charter language. Wasn't considered a high priority, but as a non-primary focus, could do multicast, and it lists here various things that should be taken into account, probably using PIM-SM, but it's not. I don't think that would have actually been necessary to use that. There have been presentations to Babel concerning the possibility of using beer for multicast and stuff like that. So that's, you can see there, and that there has been, in fact, very little work on multicast in Babel. Next slide, please. So what would you need to do to the MANET charter to move Babel maintenance over? It's really pretty trivial. Most of the MANET charter is, as I read it, fairly general. Can accommodate a wide variety of things. The last 2 paragraphs, one says, currently says, that MANET will consult with the Babel working group, which will be difficult to do after it doesn't exist, although the mailing list will probably remain. And lastly, there's a list of things which the MANET working group is responsible for the maintenance thereof, and Babel would be added to that. So it's really just a minor wording tweak at the end there to transfer Babel maintenance to MANET. Next slide. So you might also want to do things with MANET milestones. You could add a milestone to MANET related to multicast extensions for Babel. And recently, partly in my agitation, there's been a discussion of adapting Babel for use in IEEE 802.11 Wi-Fi mesh. So this, I give a presentation at 117, and there's the pointer to the full presentation on that, including pointer to, that presentation includes a pointer to the liaison from 802.11 explicitly saying that they're fine if the IETF wants to do this. So that's basically it, I think. And the next slide, I think, is the end slide. So if anybody has any questions related to any of these, I'd be happy to endeavor to answer them.
Thank you, Donald. Anyone? Any questions? Yes, Don?
Yeah, just a clarification of what we should do with the mailing list. You mentioned the Babel mailing list continuing. if all new Babel work goes to MANET, should we just somehow merge the mailing list?
That's possible. I'm not sure what's been done previously with protocols whose work was transferred to MANET. The Babel Working Group mailing list is not particularly active currently. I think that the people who are really interested in MANET could adapt to moving the traffic to the MANET list. So that seems like a perfectly reasonable thing to do. I think I can inquire on the Babel Working mailing list as to whether people see anything problematic with that.
Yes, that makes sense. Okay. I'll bring up my chair slides again. Where were we? So, following on from how Babel will become part of the MANET working group in the new charter, we now have the general work items for the new charter discussion. I have prepared some slides, but feel free to interrupt me at any time if you have any comments or suggestions. We need to recharter in order to be able to take on new work, and actually also to shed some items from the charter that will never materialize, we think, the chairs think. And also to formalize this so-called assimilation of Babel. We start the discussion now. It really had been my intention to already start the discussion on the mailing list, but yeah, it did not happen because other activities got the better of me. What I am doing in the next slides is throw out a whole long list of potential items, and hopefully we can just eliminate a few already and reduce it significantly. In any case, what is maybe the most important criterion for taking on the work is that there's actually somebody in the work group that's willing to put effort in this, because otherwise we will again end up with a charter with a number of dead items, so to speak. So on the current charter, we had the development of DLAB, and that has been at least very successful. The previous charter, the current charter, was established in 2016. The work on DLAB was already well underway then, but it was finished, I think, in somewhere in 2017. At least RC 8175 was, and a number of extensions to DLAB have emerged since then. We're still trying to get the credit-based flow control extensions out the door. In the meantime, there has been a simpler flow control scheme devised, and that made it to RC status 8651. The idea to use DLAB extensions for reporting statistics was never picked up. The work on the credit-based flow control was, let's say, modularized in such a way that there's a different draft for traffic classification that could, in theory, also serve other purposes than flow control. That could be a basis, for instance, for this statistics reporting. But my impression is that there's not much interest in doing this anymore. So I would suggest to drop this and not let this come back on the new charter. But if anybody thinks otherwise, then I'd like to hear that. There was an intention to do more work on multicast, specifically on the way that simplified multicast forwarding was implemented as an experimental RFC, and maybe take a slightly different approach. I never really understood what the protocol action would be here, because in my view, developing this multicast forwarding information base is a local implementation thing. But again, if somebody has a different view, I'd like to hear that. But not much has happened since 2016, when this was presented at a Berlin meeting by Justin Dean, former chair. It's a good presentation, worth reviewing if you have the time, but nothing really materialized. So I do want to keep multicast as an item on the new charter, but I'm coming to that. And Donald has also alluded to potential multicast support by Babel. So we have to see how we can reconcile that with some of the other ideas. Then there was this work item about documenting best practices, and yeah, that also never happened, and I don't think it's going to happen. The best practices for deploying and managing MANETs, and I think these are very specific, and those who operate MANETs are not necessarily prepared to come forward with details about how they are doing it. So again, I think this is one we are not going to see the new charter, but also again, raise your voice if you disagree. No one on the mic line yet. There's an implicit work item, and maybe this should be extended with Babel, as Donald suggested. But I think we will keep this. OLSR v2 is a major product of this working group. It was completed in 2014. There is one, well, to my knowledge, there's one current open source implementation out there. There once was one from Niigata University in Japan, but I'm not sure if that's still maintained. Henning Rogge from Fraunhofer and his colleagues who did the OLSR v2 implementation that's open source are now working on a new implementation in Go language. It looks like that's not going to be open sourced, but there's still development going on in any case. And I think this is something that should reappear as a work item in the new charter. And then there may maybe some things that some further work that can be done. For instance, there was a discussion on the mailing list in the summer of 2022. Christopher Doyelov was involved in the discussion. Christopher, welcome also. On potential problems by restarting a single node of a mobile ad hoc network running OLSR v2, and then that node being unable to join the network again. There is the directional airtime metric that has been that's an experimental ROC, but it has been used. It's part of the Fraunhofer open source implementation. It has seen use, and the question is there any incentive to bring that to proposed standard status? And then there is the multi-topology extension, somewhat akin to what Donald just mentioned for TOS-based routing in Babel, which was not pursued. But this multi-topology extension is, if I remember correctly, also has also experimental status, and the question is, should we also bring that to proposed standard status, and has anybody actually ever used it? I don't know if Christopher wants to say something about that. If not, then something else came to mind just during Donald's. Yes.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yes. I wouldn't say we ever used the multi-topology extension to OSRv2. When I was employed by BA Systems, we certainly implemented it, and it was part of the BA Systems implementation, which unfortunately is neither open source nor still available to me. I made one attempt to try and get access to it, but that didn't succeed. Bureaucracy. So that's the state there as from my position.
Okay, thank you. I know that there is interest from certain users for this work in environments where there are some pretty low capacity links, and you would like to reduce, basically to eliminate those links from the topology for application traffic that couldn't make usefully use of these low capacity links anyway. Don't try to send video traffic over a very low capacity link. That's the sort of idea behind this. So moving on, during Donald's presentation, he's mentioned something about source-specific routing in Babel. During, I don't remember the IETF number, but the one that we had in Prague in 2015, somebody was prodding Henning Roginger and saying, why doesn't OLSR v2 have source-specific routing support? And he actually added this to his implementation during the IETF week, and it has been used. I will talk to him to ask whether that could become an internet draft, whether there's any protocol action that he sees to bring this to the IETF. So that could be another OLSR v2 extension, and another reason why, in my view, we should keep this on the charter.
Can I just say that when I was recently looking at OLSR v2, there is a small tweak that might be of interest if people were ever running it in a slow mode, only respond to changes action to permit sending remote TPs when you notice someone news joined to the network. That's a possible sort of 7466 style minor tweak, adding permissions that don't actually affect interoperability.
And that could take the form of an informative RFC, or
I'm not sure what status RFC that would be. I'd have to think about that. Yeah.
could you perhaps write a few lines on the mailing list on this idea?
I will do that, yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay, DLab, as I said, one of the successes of the last years, as I view it in this working group. I think we should keep maintenance and extensions on the charter. In fact, we still have running, or should have just concluded, working group adoption call for 3 extensions. Interestingly, there was support expressed by one radio vendor. I was really hoping for some more support from participants, known participants of this working group, but on the other hand, I'm myself guilty of not expressing support with my chair head off. I will still do that because I do support adoption of these 3 drafts by Henning. Babel maintenance and extension also seems like a no-brainer to me. Whether we word it as a specific work item, or we edit this to the stanza about OLSR maintenance in the way that Donald has already suggested, is only a minor item of discussion, I think. Then there was this Babel for IEEE 802.11 potential item that was presented by Donald at IETF 117. There was a fair bit of discussion whether or not that was within the realm of the IETF and of this working group. Donald, any views from your side?
Sure. So actually, Julius and some of the other technical people in Babel have some enthusiasm for this, and actually Julius, I think, said he thought he might be able to get some funding. But the one question is, they need is there a convenient platform on which to actually develop this so that it could be implementations? And I think there are some some platforms that are cheap and easily available that do Wi-Fi and have Wi-Fi interfaces and so forth. And I'm not perhaps familiar as I should be with some of this stuff, but there's software like I guess OpenWRT and things like that, on which this could the Wi-Fi mesh and the use of Babel could be built. So I think I see a path to people who actually want to do that. I think I might also mention and apologize for the fact that I didn't push this meeting on the Babel mailing list. But I will specifically report about it there, and hopefully there'll be participants in Babel who can participate in any mailing list discussion of these various charter items for MNA. So.
Okay, that would be good. I think the more discussion, the better. But I am personally, chairhead of, not opposed to doing this. I have no real qualms about whether this is IETF or not. As long as there are people willing to put in the effort to make it happen, that's fine with me. Then there was the other presentation at IETF 117 about this STIRP protocol, which was supposed to do or be an energy efficient way of routing in more, let's say, home-oriented manets. I think that was at least the intended application. There's been a fair bit of discussion and critical discussion on the mailing list about that, but the authors seem to have gone silent recently. I can at least prod the main author to find out whether he wants to continue working on this. And if he does so, I think he should say so on the mailing list. Don?
Yeah, on this one, I mean, wouldn't it, I saw something on Donald's slides about like class of service or service-specific routing or something like that. Wouldn't this be, rather than having a new protocol to do this, wouldn't this be an addition to, you know, existing OLSR or AOPD or something like that?
Yeah, that was, at least to me, never quite clear whether they wanted to have a whole new protocol or that they would want to make modifications to an existing protocol, OLSR v2, for instance. And I think others have also pointed this out on the mailing list that they were not decided on that, as far as I could make up. But yeah, again, applying the principle that something can make it onto the new charter if at least there are people willing to do work. We should ask them, and then of course we can, if it ever gets adopted by the working group and owned by the working group, then yeah, we can see what form it takes and how it should be brought in line with perhaps an existing protocol without completely disrupting that. Anyway, that's the first step, is to know whether they want to continue with this. Next on the list is something to do with management. I need to go reread the latest version of the DTN management architecture, which used to be called the asynchronous management architecture, which I liked better as a name, which is at the DTN working group at the moment, in or just past the working group last call. I must admit that I haven't looked at it in the last few months, so I would have to reassess its potential suitability in a Manet environment. Then we have tried in the past in the working group to specify a on-demand or reactive routing protocol, which was first AODV, which became an experimental RFC. Then it was called DIMO and was intended to be standards track, and then DIMO was renamed to AODV v2. Lots of discussions, let's say in the first half of the previous decade. And finally, there were some big technical issues which caused this thing to be abandoned. First, it was proposed that it would be experimental again. Christopher, you want to say?
There was also a spin-off LoadNG, which is essentially a simplified AODV version 2, which is semi-standardized as an annex to an ITU standard.
I didn't know that. At the time, I think AODV v2 and LoadNG were competing head-to-head.
They were, but they are both essentially developments of AODV.
Yes.
And without wanting to list any rocks, let's just say that the problems weren't entirely technical.
Right. Yes. I also don't want to reopen that can of worms, but yes. So LoadNG was eventually standardized in some form, but it happened outside the IETF.
Yeah.
And it was at the time it was the AD's decision that this working group should continue with AODV v2, which then unfortunately was halted a few years later. One long-time IETF working group participant, Abdusalam Balioun, I'm probably mispronouncing his name, apologies for that, recently suggested also a hybrid routing protocol on the mailing list. There have been just a few presentations in the distant past on this. There was always a lot of pushback against this idea, or maybe not to the idea as such, but to the proposed specifications at the time. So that never happened. And again, I would say if there's nobody willing to take this up, then we can just forget about it, just apart from from any technical merits of the...
Yes. I have done theoretical work on borrowing the REC mechanism from AODV into OLSRv2, which is and even generalizing it to a sort of policy-based approach to what you're prepared to, what routers are prepared to do that makes them reactive or proactive. And if I'm not in a position to be somebody who's a major driver in taking that work, I'd be prepared to contribute in a secondary role the ideas that have been had, but you'd need someone who's actually prepared to drive it.
Understood. That's clear. So unless such a person emerges soon, I think we will keep this off the new charter. That's at least my assessment. But I keep asking for people to disagree with me. And then there's any other topics that people might want to bring up. So basically, we have the maintenance of what was developed in the past, OLSR v2, now also Babel, DLAB. I personally would want to commit to doing some work on multicast. I forgot what I had on my slide. Oh, this is my last slide anyway. And they are misnumbered. Sorry for that. So yeah, I have some idea that was inspired by beer on doing a bitstring based version, but I have to really test it out a bit further. It's not even an internet draft in the making at the moment. I would really like to do a bit of implementation and see if it could actually work before bringing that. But I still think that multicast in general should be an item on the new charter. Another thing is that what I come across in my work environment is the need to have manets with different origins, from different origins. Some of those proprietary talk to each other, and therefore there is a sort of a need of a way to federate manets, and that's true for both unicast and multicast. Interestingly, in experimenting with a sort of overlay protocols over distinct manets, I often use the Babel protocol as one of the routing protocols, just to have something different from OLSR, and then see if we could make them a Babel domain talk to an OLSR domain by using some kind of overlay. And this is, I think, really all I have on slides. And I'd really like to hear from some of the participants if they think that I'm completely insane, or I have overlooked things, or yeah. So I'm sort of opening the floor to others to give opinions. Yes, Jim.
So, so I think a lot of this obviously needs to be discussed on the mailing list, but my concern is that, you know, my observation since becoming AD is that there's a severe lack of enthusiasm to essentially work on anything. And what I really want to see is, number one, the documents that are already working group documents actually make some progress. And number two, we need to see people that stand up and say, yes, this is important to me. Yes, this is something that we want to work on, because if there's only one person that's prepared to do any work on a particular area, then, you know, getting that recharted is really not what we want to be looking to do. We need to get participation and enthusiasm on this new work, because otherwise we're just going through an exercise and that really is not helpful to anybody. So that's really my input. I think, number one, there needs to be discussion on the mailing list showing support for items that you want to add to the charter. Number two, you need to flesh out that charter on the mailing list. And then number three, we make a decision as to what we do with the working group based on the outputs from those two things.
Yes, you're right. Apart from the documents that have been in the working group for far too long, and need to be progressed.
Yeah, I think there's four of them in the queue right now. Which
yeah, but there are some particular problems with, for instance, some of the authors not being reachable anymore, and missing IPR statements, and some other technicalities that we maybe should discuss at some other time how to deal with that. But,
Yeah.
yes, you're right. We can only do work if there are people willing to do that work. I personally,
Right,
have
and I think one of the issues I saw was, there was a presentation at the last IETF by basically one individual that wants to work on one particular thing, and there was no enthusiasm from anybody else that I could see in the working group. And I'm not going to keep a working group open, so one singular person can work on their pet project. I mean, that doesn't serve anybody well. So I think we really
no.
need to focus in on what is it that's left to do in MANET that we need to get completed. And then number two, is there actually anything that the community has the enthusiasm to work on that's important that will get implemented? And if the answer to that is no, then we need to have a discussion on, where do we move forward? Because rechartering is not going to solve that fundamental issue.
That is true. Um, um, Now that Babel has become, or is going to be, if we recharter and Babel is going to become part of the working group, yeah, maybe um, some work will be coming from that. If I don't know whether with this single person you were referring to Donald with his
No,
IEEE.
there was another presentation. It wasn't
Okay,
Donald's. There was another one. I forget what it was now.
it was about this STIRP
Yes,
protocol.
that's the one.
Yes,
Yeah,
and that had not one but four authors, but all from the same company.
right.
Yours.
Yeah, and that's not frankly, that's not something that I'm going to support. I certainly want to see the working group have enthusiasm to, well, number one, think that that's something that should be worked on, and number two, have the enthusiasm to actually do any
Yeah.
work on it. Otherwise,
So
it becomes a one company rubber stamp, and I'm not in that business.
no, but I mean there is a hurdle. First, there would have to be a working group adoption of the work, and
Right.
that means that more people than the authors alone need to express support for this work. So
Correct.
I think the process is there to prevent that sort of thing. Yeah, I think. Don?
Well, I mean, the other option is we put in it that the work group is closing down, right? I mean, if we don't have new material, I think the obvious thing has to be said is that the work could be shutting down, right?
Right.
Right. And then maybe in the routing area working group, some work could still be done.
Right, for the maintenance and stuff, but that's something that I'd need to think about and talk to my other ADs about. But I think that's not what I'm pushing for here. What I'm pushing for is, if there really is some new work that needs to be done, then obviously we need to recharter to allow for that. But we need to see. And I need to see that on the mailing list, people in support of that new work and actually willing to do it, because otherwise we're going to end up with a recharter and years of not much getting produced because of lack of enthusiasm, and I don't want to do that. So really my ask is, let's get this let's get this discussion onto the mailing list. Let's get people, give them the opportunity to look through the work items that you've listed here, and actually have some discussion in terms of support and willingness to work on it on the mailing list, because I think without that we're really not going to go anywhere.
Yeah. Can't say I disagree. So Donald.
Right. So I want to say I basically agree with all the above, but I just wanted to make sure one thing wasn't lost, which was there has been some discussion mention of satellite routing, let's say orbital, things. And I did look, and looking at the charter, I actually thought about whether there was anything in the charter which would need to be adjusted for that. And I didn't actually see anything. It seems the current MANET charter is general enough that it could encompass routing between satellites.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to mention that, make sure it wasn't lost.
Yeah. I thought they were going to come to us, but that did not happen. Should we go out and ask them, or?
It seems like a ping is reasonable.
Yeah.
Don, you wanted to say something?
Yep.
You're in the
Go
queue.
ahead.
Just the strategy for these, like, do you suggest like an email per topic, like, a poll for interest in this, and or what would you? Because I fear if we put out a big email that says here's what we talked about, people might not engage in that. So
I mean, personally, I think you can bullet point it to say these are the areas that we see for possible new work items in a revised charter without too much detail, and then see what response we get. I mean, if there's really no response to this, then that kind of gives us our answer right there. And
right.
I think you also need to give the working group the option to introduce new things that perhaps aren't on that list that we haven't thought about, that they would like to work on, and then that might generate some interest as well. But yeah, I think that's what I would do at this point.
Right. Okay.
So one list with.
Yeah, without too much detail, because otherwise people just won't read it. As Don said.
Of course, the last bullet would also be on there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I haven't. I mean, aside from the chairs and myself as the AD, I mean, there's 3 participants on this call. I mean, do you have any input to this, or do you agree essentially that the enthusiasm has kind of waned? I'd really like to get some input from you folks.
It has,
but Christopher, go ahead, please.
Well, I'm now retired officially, so my interest in this is basically interest. I don't have a customer, I don't have anyone doing anything, so so I might be prepared to support things. And in the one tweak area, I might take a tweak area that I mentioned earlier. I might take a lead in, but I'm not a driving force. I'm not somebody who's going to be there's interest. This shows there's interest.
Right.
Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure anybody else is going to say anything. So yeah, so let's. I think we can probably end it here. Let's get that email out to the working group mailing list, and let's see where it goes from there. I think the discussion on there is going to be very telling in terms of what we do from here, and then we can have a discussion based on those outputs.
I think it would also make sense to advertise this on the Babel mailing list while it still exists.
Yep.
Because they're now part of us, so or they. Let's assume that that's the case.
Well, there will be if it gets recharted.
Yeah.
If not, I need to think about what's going to happen with that. But probably, you know, I am reluctant to move maintenance stuff into RTGWG because there's enough stuff in there as it is. So, you know, that's something that I need to talk to my other ADs about. But what I'm not going to do is recharter a working group just to do maintenance on the protocol. That doesn't make sense. So, but let's see where the email conversation goes on the mailing list, and then we can go from there.
Right. Yes. Okay.
Sounds reasonable.
Then, unless somebody has anything else under the agenda item of any other business, I think we can close this meeting. By the way, Julius Grobacek sent an email that he was not able to participate in this meeting because he was teaching. So the time was just so we.
That's too bad. I'm sure he would have wanted to say something about some of these things.
Yes, I think so too. So yeah. Thanks in any case for everybody who participated. Jim?
Yep, that's it. Thank you.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.